We're going to be continuing in part 2 of the report on this trip to India this morning during this hour. And I did have a question right after the first one. I'm glad. Feel free to ask any questions. I may not explain everything just right. But the question was, could all of us in our traveling party, the 4 of us, all speak English? And the answer is yes. That was important. We were all able to communicate. In fact, most everybody in India has learned English in school, but for a lot of them, it was like when you learned Spanish in school. They know a few words, they understand a little bit, but they're not really fluent, but to varying degrees. But a funny thing would happen sometimes, we would always have translators when we were speaking to a crowd, and they would speak in their native, their natural language that they grew up with. But sometimes we would say something, and the translator say it, and it was not as hard as it might imagine. You get used to it. You learn to, like Lee said, speak boldly and clearly and simply. I think those words, you learn to try to make your speech simple and clear because they're having to hear you and then translate. But sometimes the translator would mess up. He would misunderstand what you said. And like half the people in the audience would tell him, no. So I realized, like, okay, they kind of understand. They're following along, at least, with what we're saying. So anyway, that was, the other thing is I found out that I have a very difficult accent. I don't feel like I have an accent at all. Of course, it sounds normal to me. But Susanta's Indian version of English was very easy for the other translators in India to understand. It sounded normal to them. Lemmy's was a close cousin to that, but Comfort and I sounded very, very foreign in our accents to them. And in fact, when we were at Susanta's house, he was translating. So a lot of people there were his family, and you'll see some pictures of that in a minute. And he said they asked him afterwards, so his family were like, how did you learn all those languages? They thought that each of us was speaking a different language. They didn't know that we were all actually speaking English, but we sound very different when we speak English from one another. But Susanta was able to understand all of us, and he was able to communicate and help us get the message through. So anyway, that was a good question. Hope that kind of clears that up a little bit. So now I want to just kind of go through the story of the trip. There's stories I couldn't fit in here that I took one out. I'm going to save it for another day. And anyway, it's really a challenge to try to figure out how to pack all this in there and not fly through it too fast. So the trip over was on December 10th. That was interesting in and of itself, but I'll focus on more important things. I want to share the dumbest picture I probably ever sent. Not just because it's a selfie, but I sent this picture. And the reason why it's probably the dumbest picture I ever seen, I was sitting in the airport about to take off from Delhi to Bhubaneswar, the last place. So I was waiting in the airport at Delhi, and I knew that Susanta was going to pick me up. But I thought, well, how is he going to find me? So I sent this with this message, hey, I'm wearing this blue shirt so he can find me. He said, I'll recognize you. I had no idea how dumb that was because there was nobody for miles that looked anything like me. And I stood out like I could have had a neon light on my head. You know, there was no need for the help. There was nobody on my plane. There was nobody. As I mentioned last week, it was not until the end of the trip, after I left Delhi, in our last stop before we left, I finally saw people that looked kind of like us. But other than that, from the entire, I thought I'd see some. You know, I thought there'd be some. Nobody. So anyway, he spotted me really easily, and there was no trouble. He didn't need the help of the picture. But I arrived there on the 12th, and then we checked in the hotel. We were in 3 different states. The first one is Odisha. This is Odisha, and then we were later in this next one, and Andhra Pradesh, and then we ended up in Tamil Nadu at the bottom. So I'll tell you a little bit about each of those. I learned a little bit of the language. I tried. I learned 2 words in every one of them, water and thank you. So I spelled it kind of phonetically. I don't think that's probably proper spelling, but water in here is Bani, and thank you is Dhanyabad. So, and also every time you see somebody, you do this, and they do the same thing, and that's how everybody greets everybody. It's like saying hello, like waving, like that. So you walk in a room, you do this, and everybody immediately does the same thing, and whenever they do that, you do the same thing. So you say that, and I learned how to say hello and stuff, but I can't remember a lot of that. And every time I tried to say one of the words, people would kind of chuckle. So I don't think I ever said any of it quite correctly. But the language is called Odia, and we started there. We spent quite a bit of time in the hotel lobby. That's tea, by the way, and they call it chai. Chai is just a word for tea, so chai tea is kind of redundant, but they serve it with a little milk and a little sweetener, and it's got some kind of seasoning. It's so good. I miss it. I wish I got to figure out how to make it because it's very, very good, and it's everywhere. It's everywhere you stop. Everybody, no matter what they've got tea everywhere. So it was a really enjoyable part of the trip. We spent a lot of time sitting there going through the whole trip, stop by stop. And what we thought about was, okay, who are the audience at this place? When we get there to this place, who are we going to be talking to? What's the makeup of the group? And what are the messages that we hope to get across? Who is going to speak on what? Comfort, what are you going to speak on? What am I going to speak on? What's Lemmy going to speak on? And who is going to go first and how does this all fit together? And so we thought through the whole trip and did quite a bit of planning to try to share messages that would be needed and helpful and understandable given the circumstances of where we were going. And even after all that planning, sometimes when we got there, we kind of sized things up and changed on the fly because we would, I think I'm going to talk about something else. So started there. One of the first things we did while we were in that main city of Bhubaneswar, which is where we flew into, the capital city of that state, we met with a group. And in this group, of course, you see Comfort in the back, but there's about 6 or 7 preachers that were invited by Susanta to come. And then there's the people that he worships with every week. So you recall from the first hour that he was kind of learned better, learned some things, corrected some misunderstandings that he had about following the Lord. And he's taught those to the people that he worships with. And so they meet in the house of one of the members normally for worship on Sundays, and he does the preaching. And so he invited his congregation to this meeting hall that they had rented for us. And he invited some other preachers that he knows in the area, and they came. And so that was our first stop. And what we would typically do at these is we had already, as I said, we kind of chosen topics, and we would each speak on whatever we had decided to do. So what I spoke on is the plan of salvation. And, you know, this crowd was mostly Bible believers of various types. I mean, they may not be doctrinally all in sync, but they all believed in God and Jesus and the Bible. So I went through from the Great Commission accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the plan of salvation. I kind of diagrammed it on the board here. You can see the little bits of believe, confess, repent, be baptized, and that kind of thing. Just a very basic ABCs kind of gospel lesson. Lemmy preached on being a citizen of heaven, I believe. And I wrote down, I think, I made a note of what Comfort preached on there. I believe it was the Jesus parable of the lost son. But we used some of these lessons over and over because we found that they were clear and we could communicate them very well, and people seemed to, understand. So Susanta did the translating, and each of us spoke. You can see they brought out tea, of course, because it's kind of necessary everywhere you go. I wish we could figure out how to implement that here in America, just to have tea everywhere. That was the only place that we were able to eat like normal people. We were supposed to go to a restaurant, but we saw that everybody there was being fed in this little cafeteria. They had made arrangements for that. It was all provided ahead of time. And we said, Comfort and I were talking. Lemmy was busy meeting with somebody. And so Comfort and I were like, why are we not eating with everybody? He said, I don't know. Maybe they think, I don't know. They're going to give us some special treatment. But Comfort and I discussed it. We're like, we want to eat with everybody. We want to be regular. So we walked in there and it caused a big disruption. We didn't understand yet. This is like day number 1. Their whole way of showing honor and hospitality. We didn't know that yet. So they were trying immediately when they realized we were coming to like set up a room off to the side. We're like, no. We're going to sit in here. And so then they tried to like set up a table, and they were quickly carrying a table over and setting it up. And we're like, we're going to sit over here with everybody else. And this lady that was in charge of all that, you could tell she was getting very frustrated. And they were serving like cafeteria style. You see the little tray. So I went over to the window, and she's like, it's like shooed me away to go. So at the very least, I had to sit and wait. And she brought the tray over to me. But she was all perturbed that we were sitting there with everybody else. And after that, we got the special treatment everywhere because we kind of realized that's what they want to do. But on this particular day, we insisted of just sitting and eating like everybody else. And I kind of wish we had been able to do more of that, but it's really their culture to give you the special treatment. So we kind of had to just accept that for the rest of the time. All right, so here's a map of Odisha, the state. We started off in Bhubaneswar, And then we traveled to Susanta's home, where his mom and dad live in Bargar, or actually outside of that in a little community called Suella. And so that's about an 8 or 9 hour trip by car. And Susanta works with and teaches people there as well. So he makes that trip every month, once or twice a month by bus. And the bus travels through the night. So he'll take a bus, and if you saw these roads, you would wonder how a bus can go down them, but they do somehow. And in fact, I think I have a picture of I don't know if that's what his bus looks like, but I looked up, because I tried to ask him, what kind of bus are you talking about? And he said it holds 70 people. And so I found a picture of a bus in his state there. It may be something like that. But he takes a bus all night long, once or twice a month, and teaches and preaches there. So when he's at home in Bhubaneswar, the people in the village join remotely by Zoom or whatever, through their phones or devices. And then when he's there, the people in Bhubaneswar join remotely. So he's always preaching for both groups of people, but he just alternates where he physically is between those two spots, teaching and preaching those people in these two areas. So we got there, and we went to his house. This is his family home. And these are people that are, some are Christians. A couple of them have already been baptized. And this is his brother, Sukanta, and he would be baptized later that evening. And some of the people were, I think, neighbors and friends who were invited to come. So we filled up the room. Some were of a Catholic background. So you had just a variety of types of religious kind of backgrounds for all these people. They were very excited to welcome us. And they packed into the little house and sat on the floor there in the room. And I did a similar lesson again. We brought with us a dry erase board, which is kind of a pain to pack in the car and figure out how to fit it. But we finally figured out a good way to slide it in. It's a kind of a small one. But I basically summarized the gospel story. Jesus was born, he died, he rose from the dead and ascended. And then how do we respond to that? And this time I was getting a little smarter, and I had Susanta write the Odia words underneath the English words, because it wasn't very helpful to them for me to write it in English. And so basically the same message again, how when we hear the message, we repent, which means we turn away from our old way of life that was headed toward destruction, and we start following the Lord's way. And then we get to baptism and, belief, and basically, again, just the basic ABCs of, becoming a Christian. So we spoke there on that day. Each of us spoke. Later that night, we got word that there were 3 people who wanted to be baptized. And because practically nobody has a car. In fact, I started thinking about this. In the whole 3 weeks I was there, I don't know. I met one person who had his own car. Nobody else had a car. So I met a guy who was driving somebody else's car. But most people, they either have a motorcycle or they have nothing, and they walk or ride a bicycle. So everybody that you see in that picture there's not a car among them. Some motorcycles, some bicycles. And they would have to walk to get where they're going, or pile onto a motorcycle, which they can fit a lot of people on. They're good at that. But because they had a group who was going to be baptized, we said, why don't you just drop me and Comfort off at the hotel, and then you guys go take care of that, and that'll free up some seats in our little car that we were using, which was 7-passenger vehicle. So they did that. So I wasn't there to witness this, but they took pictures and video and shared it with us. That's Susanta's brother. His aunt was also baptized, and another lady was baptized as well. So that brings the number up to about 5 people there at his parents' home around that area, in that village, and that he's working with. And there's hopefully going to be others as well as he continues to work with them. So the next day we went to the house of the weaver, the guy that made this cloth. If you haven't seen the video on Facebook, on YouTube, I've got a video of how his weaving operation worked and how he makes material in his home. And this guy's name is Raghunath. His loom is actually back here in the background. That's parts of it where he weaves. But they had cleared out space and everybody gathered. Now, Raghunath is the only Bible-believing person, him and his family, in his whole village. Everybody else is Hindu. And he and his family believe in the Bible, believe in God. And he invited his friends and neighbors to come. So they packed the house. So there's all these people believe in Hinduism, which means they believe in many, many gods. They worship idols, and they don't know anything about, or very little about the Bible and about the God that we serve. So you might think, oh, what kind of message would you share? And I had worked ahead of time on some, because I knew this was going to be an opportunity, and I have a lesson on who is Jesus. And so just kind of introducing, and if you can imagine, it's really amazing to have the opportunity to tell people and introduce them to Jesus who have no idea who he is. And it's just an amazing experience, and really, really, really rewarding. And what I hope to do is in future weeks, maybe share some of those lessons here. And so you can kind of hear how those lessons went, and you would kind of hope understand a little better about how we approach that. So this is Raghunath, and he's wearing the same pattern, but it's a little faded. And I realized after I saw that this must be like maybe his signature pattern or his favorite pattern, because he had given material for us all to have shirts, and our shirts match his shirt. But his is just a little bit, he's had his a little longer. And I assume he made this vest as well, or made the material for it. A box full of Bibles and Bible coloring for children. And so when we got there, after we finished our lessons, they opened that up and they handed out the Bibles in their language and their little Bible coloring book type stuff for the children to the folks there. Some of these people, including Raghunath, had joined in the weekly online Bible studies as well. So they were. Lemmy already was familiar with him. Comfort, everywhere he went, he got along great with kids. I think he mentions in his little bio that she's back there that he likes old people and children a lot, and he does really well with them. And he's everywhere he went, you could find him, connecting well with young folks. And also, it's very interesting to hear. We each preached on things, and we come from different perspectives. And so it was interesting, like Comfort had a lesson on the parable of the prodigal son, and hearing him tell that, he brought out things that I had not thought about or had not, from his perspective, from Zimbabwe. And I realized really at the conclusion of all this that these people in their cultures, including Comfort in Zimbabwe, live much closer to the way that people lived in the Bible than we do. And I think it's easier for them in some ways to relate to some of the Bible stories. Like we have to do a lot of work to get our minds and try to imagine a world like what Jesus is talking about when he's telling these parables. We have to kind of say, now here's what a shepherd does and all. But there you pass people on the side of the road with sheep, and it's like their way of life is similar in a lot of ways to what the Bible is. So I think they're somewhat a little bit closer to in their culture, the culture of the Bible times. Now, one thing, when he said in the parable of the prodigal son, I had to kind of cringe a little bit. He said, let's kill the fatted calf for this my son. I was like, I don't know if you want to say kill the fatted calf to the Hindu people, but, that was one area that I thought maybe their culture would clash a little bit. They wouldn't normally celebrate by killing a fatted calf. The next day, we went back to Susanta's family's house for church because it was Sunday. And so that we were expecting the let's say Christians to be there, but actually pretty much the same crowd came back. So we had a whole lot of people there, and this ended up not being enough communion. They had to kind of refill some stuff, and because there were more people than what we had planned on. Comfort was sitting to the side there, and he grabbed a little bottle of juice and filled those up, and he filled some of them really full. And so as I was looking at it, and I was looking at everybody sitting on the floor, and I realized we were going to pass this thing around, I thought, I bet that's going to spill. So I was first because I was sitting beside him, and I took that one that's like super full there. I mean, it was like, because I thought it would probably, if I didn't, it would probably spill. And sure enough, it spilled on my hand. And so afterwards, I was sitting there with like this incredibly sweet, sticky grape juice. But I had in my backpack, Sarah had packed some wet wipes for me. She packed like 6 packages of wet wipes in my. She was really wanting me to have wet wipes all the time. So anyway, I was able to kind of reach in there and clean my hand off, thankfully, because I was like immediately, just super sticky. Anyway, just little things that stick with me. That's what we preached on. That's kind of how we did the service. And the key to the Jesus and the blind beggar, the reason why that one kind of jumped out at me as being helpful is he believed in Jesus even though he had not seen Jesus. He'd only heard about him. He called out to Jesus in faith, and he didn't let the people around him discourage him from calling out to Jesus. Remember, they told him, be quiet, pipe down, but he kept calling out. He was persistent because these people face a lot of resistance from their friends and neighbors. And so if you're going to find salvation, you've got to have faith, and you've got to be persistent in that, even if people around you are against it. And then he followed Jesus. So it's a really easy story to tell and understand, and it makes some good points, I think, that are very relevant to new Christians and people like that. Oh, there was a guy there named Bhikkhu. Bhikkhu was a fellow classmate of Susanta's at the seminary. And so, like, Susanta's got this whole network of Pentecostal type preachers. And now that he's, learned differently, he's trying to share it with those people. And so he had told Bhikkhu that we were coming, and Bhikkhu had taken a bus and come 7 hours to be there to meet with us that day. So we sat up on the roof and talked to him, and then he joined us back at the hotel for more talk, and then later for supper. By the end of it all, he's wanting to have an online study with Susanta. So hopefully there'll be more doors kind of just opening as we go along. So that's Bhikkhu sitting over there. Really, really nice. So we had made our way over here to Bargarh, and now we needed to go to Brahmapur down here. So this is about an 8 or 9 hour drive, and that was about an 8 or 9 hour drive through these mountains. And actually, I learned when I got home and was researching this that that's the area where the big riots were at their worst. If you would go back and read about that, we drove right through that, and I didn't even realize at the time the kind of the history of that area. But that's it's all this state is where all that stuff went down. Lemmy wasn't feeling great that day. It was about the only time we ever saw him take a nap. But he just goes and goes and goes. If it gets below about 70 degrees, of course everybody's bundled up like it's winter. And plus, Susanta wasn't feeling great either. He had a little cold. But we all, thankfully, that was about the worst of it. That was the hotel we checked into. That was probably the sketchiest place we stayed at in the whole trip. The next day we went to a leper colony. So we met this guy, Asish. He is a Pentecostal type preacher. That's his background. And, but through this whole network of contacts, he welcomed us and wanted us to come see his work and to speak to some of his folks. So we went to this leper colony. And other than one of the older ladies who's missing a foot, you couldn't really tell there's anything wrong with anybody else. A few of the kids had like some scabs on their face. Everybody else looked completely fine. So I was beginning to wonder if I was in the wrong place. Like, did I misunderstand? I thought we were going to a leper colony. So a little bit later, I asked one of the guys, I said, can you tell me again, who are these people? It's a leper colony. I said, but they don't look, he said, oh, no. We got modern medicine, and they're all cured of it, like it's gone. But because they had it at one point, they're ostracized by society. So even though they've taken medicine and they're fine, they have to live here in this place with their families. And so that's just the way it is. And we brought some money to them for individually to buy, because Lemmy had asked what they needed, and they needed some mats, like a tarp type of material, and that's what they sleep on. And he said, well, would they like some blankets or something? They said, no, that's what they want. So we gave them some money that they would use to buy some basically like tarp type stuff, and that's their beds. It's really kind of sad, the conditions there. But all these people also were all Hindus. One person who's starting to believe in Jesus, but the rest of them don't know anything about the Lord really. But Asish goes there and he preaches to them and tells them about Jesus. So he wanted to welcome us and show us and introduce us. So we all spoke to them as well. Similar lessons, who is Jesus, that kind of thing is what I taught on. I can't remember what the other guys spoke on at that time. But Asish did the translating there. And then he invited us to his home. And there were a lot of young people he had invited to his house to be there for the study with some other family members, some interesting stories out of that. One thing, because he's been studying with Comfort and Lemmy online, with Lemmy, I should say. Susanta got up at one point and was going somewhere else in the house, and he went into a different bedroom. We were resting in a bedroom, And in this other bedroom, he found like all these musical instruments. So they'd sort of hid them because I think they knew that they learned enough through communicating that we don't do that. And so maybe to not offend us or whatever, they had taken all their instruments and they kind of hid them away in a back bedroom. So there's some different views, and that's what we run into. Like there's a lot of different ideas about things and different, there's some questions and some differences in how we worship, with some of these people. So I use this parable of Jesus and the centurion there. And the reason is because the centurion understood authority. He understood when Jesus speaks, that's what's going to happen. He said, because I too am a man set under authority. And when I speak, it happens. And so I use that, and I went to Colossians 2, where Jesus is the head of the church. He has all authority, and everything we do, it has to come from his authority. So we tried to kind of lay some of those foundational kind of teaching about the importance of having Bible authority for everything we do in worship, and we don't use the Old Testament and all those kinds of lessons. So that was how that went. It went really well. They're very gracious, welcomed us. We left there and we entered the next state, which is Andhra Pradesh. The language here is Telugu. Water is Nilu. And instead of Dhanyabad, it's Dhanyava. And so for thank you. So it's very similar. The thank you thing sounds similar in their language. Now, Comfort could not speak Telugu. I'm sorry, Susanta. So he had been our translator in Odisha, but when we went down here, we had to find local people to translate. And Susanta could speak in Hindi to them, but he could also speak in English. So Susanta would preach in English just like we would, and the local translator would translate into Telugu because Susanta he can understand it when he hears it, but he can't speak it fluently. So you wonder about what's it going to be like when you have these language barriers, but it's a way of life there. There's so many languages that the idea of speaking through a translation is very natural to them. It's not unusual at all because they have so many different languages. That's common. So there we met with this church that was a full-on Pentecostal worship service. They greeted us again. They treated us very specially. Sometimes I feel like a little too special. Like they had us sit up in front. They brought in these little bouquets. They did all this stuff to give us a lot of honor. It feels a little strange to me in the context of a church. I don't know, didn't really know how to feel about that. But they were it was out of a sense of trying to welcome us and, treat us with respect. And the connection to this group is that the local preacher there, a guy named John, had somehow found an online Bible study with a preacher that Sarah knows named Kieran Murphy from Vermont, and another guy whose last name is Maydell, and I don't know any Maydells. Anybody know Maydells? So there's this family of Maydells. They have an online Bible study, and this preacher had joined it. So when they heard we were going, the Maydells know Lemmy, and they said, hey, it'd be nice if you could connect with this John guy while you're there. He said, okay. So he reached out to him, and they welcomed us. And so if you haven't seen the video, they had a big, he's playing keyboard, they're all singing, and then they stand up and they're all clapping, and then it got kind of more and more energetic, so they were finally all speaking in some sort of tongues, and so that was a interesting experience to be there for that, and they were excited for us to be there. I mean, they had no idea that we didn't do things that way ourselves. They didn't know that was something that we don't do. So we each spoke, and again, I spoke on Jesus and the centurion and the Bible authority and those kind of, and we had talked about this ahead of time, and we decided that our goal was to get doors open for future studies. That if you kind of walk in the door, that you could easily just shut everything off immediately. But we wanted to lay some groundwork and hopefully open some doors for future studies like the kind they've been doing. And so that's kind of our approach to these things. We addressed the core issues, which is, Bible authority. And then I did tell John later, because they fed us lunch, I said, now where we just sing, and that's what we do where I worship, and that this was kind of different from what I'm used to. And so try to kind of put that out there to kind of get maybe the conversation started with him. So you might think about what would you say if you had the opportunity. It's a challenge to know what's the best thing. From there, we went to our first established Church of Christ assembly we might say, that felt very much at home. In fact, we just sat in the front row. It wasn't even, you know, it was sort of like what you would expect if you had a visiting preacher. It wasn't really a lot of the way that we had been treated other places. We didn't get the special treatment here, and I kind of like that. And, you know, we just kind of, oh, welcome, brothers, come here and sit down. And, you know, it kind of felt, I really felt at home at this congregation. They've outgrown this floor. Their building has more than one floor, so they have a room above it, and they have a television, and they have a camera here so people can sit up there and hear, because they can't all fit together. This is the full group that was there. So you can tell there's more people in this picture than in that picture. And some of the ladies were sitting upstairs. This congregation and several of the others that we met as we traveled further south could trace their roots back to some American preachers who had come over years ago and had done a lot of work. And so there's congregations that have been there for decades, generations now, and all that people have done in the past. Then we met with what was scheduled to be a preacher study. So these guys are all preachers. And this church, the building was decked out for Christmas. That's their Christmas decorations. I didn't know for sure what it was because it doesn't look like Christmas decorations to us. But I found out later that all of this was Christmas decorations. So we each had an opportunity to speak again here. And then we went to the home of the preacher on Christmas Day. So that was the day before. This guy is the preacher there, and he has a church that meets in his home, and so we worshiped with them. I thought this little girl was really cute, and that girl right there, her name is Rita, and she was really sweet too. Just wonderful people. So we worshiped with them and then shared a meal together with them at the Cotta Road Church of Christ. The next day, that same preacher had arranged a building in town that we could, to invite large numbers of people to come. So there was about 70 people at this event to give us another opportunity to speak. So, you know, we all had topics that we had chosen. They had kind of advertised it. This is the same picture, just from the other point of view. They had banners. They had, you know, invited everybody. Now, as we traveled south and we got out of Odisha into these other states, there was less opposition. So it was easier to be more, there was less reason to be concerned about what people would think. And they advertised, and it was like a public thing, and there was no Lemmy kept saying it's really in this northern part where we have to be cautious, and the further south we go, the less trouble there is for Christians. So in a place like this, there was no fear, you know, that people would find out we were there or anything. Then we kept on traveling, and we came down to the last state, which is Tamil Nadu. Water here is like Thani or something, which is similar. The thank you is Nandri. And we had 2 preacher studies. This guy, David, organizes these preacher studies. He has one on Thursday every week and one on Tuesday. The Tuesday one is this group, and these are all preachers from Churches of Christ in the area somehow. I mean, some might travel an hour or 2 hours to get there, but every Tuesday he meets with these guys and has a Bible study. And then every Thursday he has a Bible study with, he calls it denominational preachers. And I think what they mean by that is, I think they're mostly from Pentecostal kind of background. So he introduced me. This is the guy, the preacher, he's the pastor at the Pentecostal church over here. And all these people understand that we don't all agree, and that he's having this study with them. And I thought, this is amazing. You know, how often would you be able to just gather together people who know on the front end that they don't have the same doctrinal views, but will meet every week to study the Bible? Well, that's wonderful. You know, you just hardly hear something like that. And so we had different messages on those 2 different days, you know, just understanding what we do and don't have in common on some of these things. And in this particular lesson, oh yeah, they decorated this chalkboard by hand. Isn't that something? That's all colorful. Some of those preachers did that. Like, wow, that's really impressive. So on this lesson, Lemmy did a lesson. You can see the back of it's been erased a little bit on dispensations. So you have the patriarchal age, the Mosaical age, and then we're over here in Christ. So we don't follow the the instructions in the law of Moses on how to worship and those kind of things. We follow the teaching of the New Testament. So that was his lesson. And I did a lesson on King Josiah. So when he was 8, when he began to reign, and he said he was, he tried to do what's right. When he was 16, he set his heart to seek the Lord. And when he was 20, he went around the land clearing out all the idols, destroying them, burning them, demolishing them, grinding them up. And when he was 26, he decided to repair the temple, you might recall, and they found the book of the law, and they brought it out, and they read it, and he repented, and he started doing everything by the instructions in the book, right? He restored worship according to the instructions in the book. So that's the whole message there, that we have to constantly be going back to the book and make sure that we're doing things the way the Lord tells us to. So that was kind of my, I learned at this point that English words don't really help much. So I went to emojis, basically, by the end of it all. Then at the end of that, we had a question and answer session, which was really lively. Lots of guys were standing up and asking questions. Some of them were kind of funny. One of them, he said, they read a passage. It was from the Psalms where it said that through Moses, the Lord fed the people with the bread of angels. And he's talking about, if you keep reading in manna, that it calls it the bread of angels. And so they said, do angels eat food? Think about how you'd answer that. I said, well, I think what it means is it was angels, bread that angels provided. It wasn't like angels, food that angels eat. Angels, being spiritual beings, probably don't eat food. You know where they went next? What about when Abraham had those visitors? Oh, I didn't think about that. So, yep, they fixed food for him, right? And who were those visitors? They were the Lord/angels, and they ate the food. It's like, okay, well. So sometimes angels do eat food, I guess. I wasn't really ready for that question. It wasn't something I'd studied about ahead of time. But they had quite a few other questions. We had a really fun discussion. It was very interesting. At the conclusion of that, we went back to the hotel room and we had a let's sit down and talk through the whole trip. And we made notes about what went well, what we would have maybe done a little differently, how we could improve, future plans, where we could go next. If we came back, where would we focus our time and energy, those kinds of things. Made lots of notes, kind of a wrap up, and then we headed to the airport and flew home. That was the conclusion of the thing. My flight was on the 30th, but it was 1:50 in the morning on the 30th. So we just went to the airport, hung out till time to board the plane. So basically, if you were to break it down by state, in the northern part, there was a lot of new converts and Hindus, people who've never heard the gospel. In the middle, we ran into lots of people who have a Pentecostal background. And in the last state, we studied with tons of preachers. As we thought about all that, and we thought about if we had the opportunity to return, we all agreed that we were most excited about the work that was going on in the north where Susanta is, the opportunity to tell people who've never heard the gospel and work with those new converts. So we decided if we had another opportunity to come back, we would like to spend more time and focus our efforts up there with those new converts, those new churches, where Susanta is basically working alone. At the further south we went, we found lots of preachers. But up there, he seems to be kind of a one-man band and trying to, evangelize these two communities 8 hours apart. And so we thought we would like to, if we get a chance, go back up that way. So what next? I've already met with Lemmy via, the magic of online, and they have ongoing studies. I told them I want to be involved in that, so hopefully I'll be joining in or leading some online studies like they've been doing. Lee and I have talked, and we still have a goal, and we talk about this all the time with Comfort and Pick, that they want us to come see them in Zimbabwe. That's probably next on the to-do list. And then maybe, who knows, if the Lord wills and if it works out, it might be a return trip to India at some point in the future. I would like that. Some needs. We, of course, ran into tons of needs, as you can imagine. And we get lots of requests for help. In fact, just this weekend, we got a request for a lady who's very sick and needed to go to the hospital where Robert works. And so we sent some aid to help her with her emergency kind of medical needs. Comfort has needs at his house, and Robert has needs. And everywhere I went, we ran into people that have needs. And they know that you're coming from America, you probably have money. And so it's, it's one of those things that you just have to figure out, what can we do? I want to point out that Comfort, I know we've gone a little over, but I'm almost done. Comfort was very good about our driver, and that's the whole story of itself, but Comfort, I haven't mentioned much about him, but about midway through the thing, Comfort was inviting him to stay in his hotel room. And then by the time it was over, the driver was wearing some of Comfort's shirts, and Comfort was sharing a lot of stuff. Even though Comfort himself, didn't have a whole lot, but he was willing to share what he had with this guy. And that's kind of the whole mentality, of sharing. So some of the preachers there would love to have some support, but I don't know a lot of them as well as the others. But the one that I did get to know a lot on this whole trip was Susanta. So that might be something we can discuss. I haven't had a chance to talk about it with Lee and John, but it's possible that we might be able to partner with him in some way in his work. That's something that we can think about and pray about. Also, he does have an immediate need that I wanted to just tell you as individuals, if you're interested. I mentioned in the first hour that he's going to be getting married soon, and they have on the roof of his parents' house, they have collected these bricks, or bought them somehow, and what he would like to do is build a little room here for him and his wife to live in above his mom and dad, so they could, share that property. And he put together a little estimate. To do everything he wants to do is a little over $3,000, 30-something hundred. But I think he could get a room to stay in, at least have a bedroom for, probably half of that. And so he had shared that with us, that he had hoped to. She's coming, as you know, or her family's coming in within the next month to kind of meet his family. And so I'm sure one of the things he'll be trying to figure out is when you marry my daughter, where are you going to live? Where are you going to stay? And so if you're interested, I'm interested in helping him with that. And I'll just put it out there that if you would like to help, you can just see me individually, privately. We can share with him if you're interested in doing that. And who knows, maybe as a congregation, we might be able to partner with him in some of his work down the road. That's something I did not, of course, commit to, and we'll have to discuss it. So I wanted to conclude with this. We're out of time. We talked a lot about the Great Commission, going to all the world. Jack sang that song, spread the news over land and sea. It's a huge country, and Lemmy kept pointing out, if somebody doesn't, who's going to go if we don't go? There's billion plus people. It's amazing, and some of them are hungry and eager to hear the word. And it's a pleasure and a joy to be some part of that. And you had a part in that, just by praying for us, by financially supporting it. You have a share in that work, and we continue to have a share in that work. And so we know, of course, it was the Lord's will that this would go on. And it's his will that all of us would also be disciples and followers. And so if you're here today and you need to give your life to the Lord, if you need to have your sins washed away in baptism,